As the video begins, the narrator's voice cuts through with a calm yet charged tone, laying out the situation with precision. He explains how in the days leading up to Shonda Combs' arrest, a shocking discovery emerged, one that no one could have anticipated. He describes how Sean, despite having his home raided by federal agents months earlier, continued filming himself as if nothing had happened. This wasn't casual filming. These were private recordings, the type no one expected to see, especially after the authorities had already seized all his tapes and devices. The narrator details how the footage somehow slipped out of Sean's possession and made its way into the hands of none other than 50 Cent. It's presented as a turning point. Footage that should have been impossible to obtain, suddenly appearing in a Netflix documentary that's already shaking the internet. The narrator emphasizes the shockwave this created, especially among Sean's legal team, who were blindsided and furious at how such sensitive content ended up being broadcast to millions. The tone continues to build as the narrator sets up the seriousness of this moment and why the leaked clips are becoming the center of attention. The narrator continues, guiding viewers deeper into the intensity of what the clips actually contain. He paints the picture of a man completely unaware of how much danger he was in. Sean is seen talking, moving around, acting casually, almost too casually, while the weight of the federal raid still hung heavily over his life. The narrator describes how surreal it feels to watch these recordings now, knowing what would eventually unfold. He explains that the video makes Sean seem oddly confident, as if he believed the investigation had already passed or that nothing incriminating had been found. The narrator emphasizes how viewers can see moments where Sean tries to justify himself, other moments where he rambles, and even points where he appears to be documenting things intentionally for his own record. All of this, the narrator stresses, becomes far more disturbing when placed in the context of his ongoing legal troubles. The footage wasn't meant to be entertainment, it was practically a confession in motion. And now that the documentary has brought it into the public eye, people everywhere are dissecting each frame, searching for clues, answers, or signs he never meant anyone to see. The American accent now shifts focus to the aftermath, the immediate chaos triggered by the release of these clips. He describes how 50 Cent, never one to shy away from controversy, wasted no time showcasing the footage in his documentary, framing it as a critical piece of evidence that ties everything together. The narrator explains how the internet erupted within hours, with social media analysts, bloggers, fans, and critics all trying to decode the meaning behind Sean's actions. Meanwhile, Sean's lawyers are portrayed as being thrown into total disarray. The narrator captures their frantic attempts to contain the fallout, emergency meetings, public statements, and growing frustration over how the footage escaped their control in the first place. The narrative tone highlights how this leak didn't just worsen the public perception, it changed the trajectory of the entire case. The narrator emphasizes that what makes the situation even more explosive is the timing. Sean recorded the clips just a week before he was arrested, during a phase when he should have been at his most cautious. Instead, viewers are left watching a man unravel on camera, not realizing these final private recordings would become the catalyst for an even larger scandal broadcast worldwide. As the narrator continues, the focus shifts to the wider reaction from the industry and people who once stood close to Shonda Combs. He explains how former associates, business partners, and even longtime friends were suddenly dragged back into the spotlight, forced to face questions they had been avoiding for months. The narrator describes the tension that now hung in the air. Everyone connected to Sean was scrambling to distance themselves, giving statements that carefully avoided admitting any involvement. Behind the scenes, however, the video makes it clear that panic was spreading quickly. The narrator highlights how the documentary's rapid rise on Netflix only amplified the chaos, with millions tuning in and dissecting every second of Sean's leaked footage. Some insiders began leaking additional details anonymously, terrified their names would appear next. The narrator explains that this wasn't just a PR disaster, it was a meltdown stretching across the entire network of people who once stood proudly in Sean's circle. The footage had thrown their world into confusion, and with each hour that passed, the fallout grew heavier and more unpredictable. Now the narrator turns to the public reaction, painting a vivid picture of how the general audience interpreted the leaked material. He explains that viewers around the world weren't just watching. They were forming theories, debating motives, and questioning how such footage could have ever reached 50 Cent in the first place. The narrator describes how comment sections exploded across social platforms, flooded with arguments, shock, humor, accusation, and endless speculation. Some believe the footage proved long-standing rumors, while others argued it revealed a more fragile, desperate side of Sean that had never been visible to the public before. The narrator emphasizes the emotional roller coaster viewers experienced, moments of disbelief, moments of dark comedy, and moments where the seriousness of the situation struck them all over again. As the documentary gained traction, the narrator details how hashtags trended worldwide, reaction videos surged, and countless creators jumped on the story, each adding their own interpretation. The leak didn't just expose Sean, it activated the entire internet, transforming the scandal into a global discussion that wasn't slowing down anytime soon. The narrator's tone deepens as he shifts toward the legal consequences, now spiraling out of control. He explains how prosecutors who had been quietly building their case suddenly found themselves handed a mountain of unexpected material that could strengthen charges, open new lines of questioning, or even trigger fresh investigations. The narrator describes how legal experts began appearing on news networks, breaking down the footage frame by frame and outlining how it might affect the outcome of Sean's case. Meanwhile, Sean's legal team was being crushed under the pressure, constantly adjusting strategies, withdrawing earlier claims, and trying desperately to reassure the public that the footage was being misinterpreted. But the narrator notes a grim reality. Once the public sees something, it cannot be unseen. The leaked videos had already shaped the narrative in a way no lawyer could reverse. The narrator makes it clear that this wasn't just an embarrassing moment for Sean. This was a devastating blow with long-term consequences that no one could walk away from untouched. Now, the narrator focuses on the media landscape, showing how major networks and journalists raced to secure exclusive angles on the story. He explains how suddenly every outlet, from entertainment blogs to mainstream news, began broadcasting timelines, expert panels, personal testimonies, and investigatory reports. The narrator describes the frenzy behind the scenes, phone calls between reporters, old archived materials being dug up, and a wave of insiders offering to come forward as long as their identities remained hidden. All of this contributed to a growing storm of conflicting information, half-truths, and sensational claims. The narrator emphasizes how the leak changed the tone of coverage entirely. Before the footage, the story was serious but manageable. Now it had turned into a cultural moment, with each media outlet trying to dominate the narrative. The documentary had become the centerpiece of a massive public debate, fueled by Sean's own recordings and amplified by 50 Cent's strategic timing. The narrator makes it clear that the media wasn't simply reporting the story, they were shaping its legacy. The narrator's voice lowers, preparing viewers for one of the most impactful elements of the entire situation: the psychological unraveling visible in Sean's leaked recordings. He explains how careful viewers could detect subtle shifts in Sean's behavior. The nervous pacing, the contradictory statements, the forced confidence masking deeper fear. The narrator describes how, when watched closely, the footage plays like a slow descent into paranoia, revealing a man who was trying to convince himself he was still in control. The narrator emphasizes that these weren't deliberate confessions. They were fragments of a mind under pressure, unknowingly exposing truths through tone, movement, and unguarded moments. This psychological layer became one of the most discussed aspects of the documentary, with viewers and analysts debating what was genuine fear and what was calculated performance. The narrator highlights how these emotional cues made the footage even more compelling, transforming it from simple video logs into a raw portrait of a man caught between denial and collapse.